All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Workforce Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be on for moderation and technical support today. So feel free to type in the chat if you need any technical support or have logistic questions. Let me go ahead and make sure that you can participate in the chat because sometimes my Zoom settings like to change. There we go. Anyone can type in the chat now and say good morning to us. Um, like I said, my name is Kirsten Bayer, and here at ICSPS, we put on the Workforce Wednesday webinar series. And so we're excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Creating Welcoming and Effective Written Communication. This is a part one of two series, and we are excited to welcome Sarah Glazer, who is a senior program manager from the Clear Language Lab at Literacy Works. So I'll let her introduce herself in a little bit. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are on the Zoom meeting platform this time. So Sarah wanted this webinar to be a little bit more engaging. So you do have full capability to turn on your microphone and your camera. We encourage you to do so. Please just be mindful of where you're at in your workspace. If you do have your camera on, I will keep Sarah pinned so that the recording will only pick her up and then it will pick up anyone else who's talking. However, just be mindful that if you do have your camera on, that everyone on this call can see your camera. So if you do not want your camera on, please turn it off. But we do encourage you to have it on so you can fully participate and immerse in today's webinar and training. For participation, like I said, you can feel free to unmute yourself. You can type in the chat and conversate that way. Or if you have a question or comment that you want to make sure you don't forget, definitely type that in the chat. We are recording today's webinar and it will be posted on our Illinois Workforce Academy website. I'll put that website in the chat here momentarily. And tomorrow you will receive a follow-up email where you'll have a URL where you can access the recording and today's slide deck, as well as a follow-up survey. The follow-up survey is about 5 questions. I'm also going to put that follow-up survey in the chat towards the end of the webinar. I do encourage you to take that follow-up survey. We've shortened it so it doesn't take you as long, and it helps the WIOA Professional Development Committee, which I help staff along with my director, Amy Julian, to decipher what topics and presenters that we want to continue to have as a part of this professional development series. So we really welcome your feedback and thank you in advance. We also have closed captioning on today for accessibility purposes if you need to or for note-taking purposes. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to type those in the chat. Really quickly, before I hand it off to Sarah, we're just going to do our beginning Workforce Wednesday webinar polls. So the first one is just location. Where is your local area at today? And this helps the WIOA Professional Development Committee decipher if we are meeting the whole state, because we want to reach the whole state. We're a long state. We want to reach everyone, staff and state level and local level and other WIOA partners and stakeholders and employers and CBOs across the whole state. So this helps us recognize if we are doing that. So we'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer this poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. I'll share the results really quickly. It looks like we have a good span of people from Chicago and Northern Illinois, and then a good span of people from Southern Illinois as well. A couple sprinkled in Central, and we have 2 people that are statewide. So thank you for sharing that with us. And then the next one is which WIOA partner do you best represent? So if you can let us know if you best represent Title I, Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth Programs, Title II, Adult Ed and Family Literacy, Adult III, Employment Services, or Title IV, Voc Rehab, or other WIO partner and stakeholder, or state or local workforce innovation board member. So thank you in advance for taking this poll, and I'll give everyone a couple more seconds to do so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end that. Looks like we have a good set of people from Title I and Title III. couple of people from Title II, and other WEO partners and stakeholders as well. So thank you all for taking those polls. I know they can get a little redundant if you've ever joined a Workforce Wednesday webinar before, but we do appreciate it. And I'm going to hand it off to Sarah to introduce herself and start her presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah. I'll do a more robust introduction in a second. But like Kirsten said, this is part one of our Creating Welcoming and Effective Written Communication, and we're going to be talking about plain language, what it is, what it means, how we use it in our work. Um, just want to reiterate a couple things as we get started. One, please participate however you feel most comfortable. You can respond in the chat, you can unmute yourself, you can use the emojis, the reactions, like whatever. I'm watching it. Whatever speaks to you. Cameras on or off, again, whatever feels most comfortable. Please ask questions as they come up. There's no need to hold questions till the end. We don't take a break, so do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If you need to step away, no big deal. And then I just shared a link in the chat that you can open up that has the training overview and resources doc. So I'm going to switch my screen real quick so we can look at that so folks can see. It is a Google Doc, and so it has, you'll see the session materials, so the slides, um, and then a summary of key ideas for you to come back to later. And then another piece that we'll talk about in a second. If you are not seeing where it says Part 1, Introduction to Plain Language, you may need to open up a different tab. So on the left side of your Google window, you might see this little like a number with some lines. If you click on that, that opens up the tab menu and you can access part one. If you're registered for both parts or aren't able to attend both parts, everything's all in one notes document. Sorry, there's an eyelash. All right. And we'll keep chugging along. Um, So, my name is Sarah Glazer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the senior program manager for the Clear Language Lab at Literacy Works. What that means is I work with folks across sectors to help create clear and usable communication through training and materials review. So, I help create documents, support document editing, and also do lots of trainings like this to help teach people about different communication strategies to connect with their audience. Before this, I was a teacher. I taught English language arts for several years in middle school, and then I transitioned to adult education. And so most of my teaching experience was working with a lot of the same folks that you all work with adult English language learners. I know there's a big overlap in some of those people that we served. And so when I'm thinking about clear communication, I'm often thinking about my students and the challenges they experience and how a lot of times the challenges, the things they brought to me wanting help with had very little to do with their actual English language skills and had a lot to do with processes and information just being really, really confusing and them not having the cultural context to understand them or things just not being written clearly. And something bringing me joy today, whoops, is honestly the rain. I love a good rainy day. It makes me just want to curl up with a book. So it's kind of making me happy today. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to share whatever you want to share, your name, pronouns, your role, and something bringing you joy today. It's always nice to know who we got in the room, so I'll give folks a second to respond to that. I don't know why this keeps switching over. Oh, your dog. Yeah, pets are always a popular one. People's little fur babies making an appearing. Oh, that's very, very sweet. Trevor, everyone's bright and shiny faces. Warm cup of coffee. Yes. Um, awesome. Well, thanks, folks. I'll keep an eye on those, but we'll keep moving forward. Thank you for introducing yourself. It's nice to see, like I said, who we got in the room. Yeah, no, I'm excited. The rain is good for the garden. Um, oh, this webinar, thanks for sharing that. Oh, congratulations. Oh, I lost it. Someone's about to have a grandson. Congratulations. All right, so Literacy Works. If you're not familiar with us and what we do, we are Chicago-based, but we serve all of Illinois, and we have partners and worked with folks across the United States and in Canada. And we believe access to information is critical for a fair and equitable society. And so, how we do that. Some of you may be familiar with our community literacy program. They provide support for adult education and adult literacy
Hello.
programs across Illinois. Um, and
Yeah.
then, oh, there's, I'm going to ask folks to mute. Yeah, thank you. Um, yeah, so provide support for adults, literacy, adult education programs across Illinois. And then in the Clear Language Lab, like I said, we work across sectors to help make everyday communication and systems more useful, understandable, and equitable. And what that means is we're really thinking about how do we make plain language the norm? How do we make clear, effective, easy to understand communication just a normal part of everyday communication? How do we center folks who have been traditionally harmed by systems and making sure that their voices and experiences are heard and that we are not continuing to harm folks in our practices? We try to co-design with our audience as much as possible. So bringing people in that design process, making sure that users have a say in what things look like. We think really broadly about accessibility, so not just what's required under the ADA to make things accessible, but really thinking about how do we make things as usable for as many people as possible. We think that the heart of communications is about building relationships and connections. And at the end of the day, we want it to make it easier for people to participate in their everyday life, whatever that looks like to them. So today we're going to be talking about what plain language is. We're going to explore some strategies that you can use to create content your audience can easily understand, navigate, and use. We'll talk about this idea of the curse of knowledge. If you're not familiar with that, that's great. We'll talk about what it means. And then we're going to look at a lot of example texts so you can get some compare and contrast and think about what differences make sense for you. And the last thing I want to say is kind of business wise. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. I don't do your job. I'm not going to pretend that I know how to do your job. And I'm not going to give you a hard set of rules to follow because plain language is not about a hard set of rules. What I am going to do is explore what it means, help you explore what it means to write in a way that centers your audience, share some strategies that you can think about in your own work, and then hopefully offer a different perspective as someone who is outside of the systems in which you work. And like I said, we're going to be looking at a lot of examples today. So if for some reason the slides are difficult for you to read, totally understand that. I'm going to share this link in the chat one more time in case there were any latecomers. Um, and you can open up that bit.ly link, and I'm going to go back one more time. And there's the plain text version of the training examples. If you open that up, it has all of the examples we're going to look at today just written out in text. So if you, for some reason, have trouble reading what's on the slides, you can look at this document and see all the examples that we're going to look at. And they're in the same order. So you can start with the first one and we'll go through it together. And again, don't hesitate if any questions come up. So let's jump into talking about plain language. What makes written communication clear and effective? You are all adults with lots of robust life experience. When you think about clear and effective communication, what comes to mind? Share a word or two in the chat. Yeah, having a clear intended audience. Easy to understand. It gets to the point, right? There's not a lot of extra information. It's pretty direct. Direct, simple. No jargon, avoiding big words. Oh, I like that. Honesty with sincerity, right? So this idea of kind of that we're genuine and we're transparent in how we're communicating. Yeah, body language is really important for clear communication when we're face to face or on Zoom or like talking to people. Awesome. Right, so we already have communicating with empathy. Yeah. Awesome. So these are like, this is a great starting place in thinking about what clear communication looks like and feels like when we're experiencing it. So plain language is really a framework or an approach to thinking about communication. And so something is considered to be plain language, or the idea behind plain language is communicating so your intended audience can easily find the information they need, understand what they find, and use that information to do what they need to do. So there's some sort of task they need to complete. It's really important that we're thinking about our intended audience because if I am not your audience, it doesn't matter if I can find, understand, and use the information, right? It's really about centering whoever is going to be using this information or who needs the information that we're sharing. So I have two examples. This is our first one. This is in the text document. You don't have to read them too closely. We can just kind of skim them, but which version feels easier to read and why? What are some of the things that jump out at you? For this, if it's easier to unmute yourself, you can unmute yourself as well.
I'd say panel two because there's significantly less prompt on it.
Yeah, there's just less words, less going on. Um, right? So I see two has chunks, right? The text is grouped into chunks and it's using bolding to make to help us find some key ideas. As you see, so, right, the one on the right, right? So it's there's more white space, bolded words, there's images to connect the explanation. Um, Right, it maps out the activities, clearly describes the actions that we want to take, right? So it's kind of it's using these, sorry, y'all, I don't know why it keeps switching like that. It's using these active verbs to kind of give us instructions and tell us what to do. So when we think about plain language, a lot of people's first thought when they hear plain language is about word choice, which is a big part of plain language. We want to use words that our audience understands. We want to use simple everyday language, things like that. But it's also about other pieces of our communication, right? Like, is the design helpful? Does it actually help guide our reader? Is information organized in a logical way? Are we sharing information where the way our audience expects it to be organized, does it align with their expectations? And is there a clear purpose and action to it? So there's really a lot more to plain language than just thinking about our word choice. And so to kind of recap this idea, plain language is about centering our readers. It's about thinking about getting information to the right size. So this idea, I've seen people use words like groups and chunks, right? Getting it to the what our audience needs for the context that we're sharing this information in. And it's about strategies. There's not a lot of hard rules to plain language because it's going to just depend on who our audience is. And it's really about thinking about being reflective and grounding our work in equity, thinking about how we can um, meet the needs of as many people as possible or meet the needs of our specific audience. Some things we hear sometimes that are some misconceptions about plain language. It's not about watering down or dumbing down information. It's not about just being as short as possible. Sometimes actually we lose a lot of important information when our goal is just to be short. So we're not just aiming to be as short as possible. And it's not about writing to a specific grade or reading level. Those can be helpful metrics, but that's not the destination. So why does this matter? Why are we talking about plain language? There's a lot of things that can make reading difficult for people, and some of these things have to do with, right, our educational experience, what we've had access to, and some of these things are just about what's going on in our lives. So things like word choice, are we using words our audience is familiar with? Um, the more complex grammar is, so like thinking about sentence structure, the more complex it is, the more difficult it is for folks to read and comprehend. How long a text is, how dense it is, right? How much information we're trying to pack in. And then this idea of cognitive load, which connects with grammar and length and density, which is really how much are we expecting people to hold in their brains at one time? So when you think about when you read a really long paragraph, you have to hold a lot more information in your short-term memory to understand what that paragraph is saying versus when it's a short paragraph, that's a less effort for your brain, right? We're expecting people to use less energy mentally. And our emotional state, right? If we're tired, if we're stressed, if we're having a bad day, these things impact how easy it is for us to read and comprehend information. I want you to think about like it's if you've ever had an experience where you were having a really, really bad day and then you came home and you opened your mail and there was like a letter from your insurance company and you were like, I'm not reading this right now, right? Because our emotions affect how we process information. And then how familiar we are with our topic. I'm a pretty proficient reader, but if you give me something about astrophysics, it's going to be hard for me because that's a topic that I don't know anything about, right? So how much background information we have affects how difficult something feels like it is to read. And when we think about kind of like the justifications for plain language, I think this is a really powerful study where they had two websites. One was they had the original site and one that was revised for plain language, and they asked folks to complete the same tasks on both websites. So it was things like signing up for something or finding specific information on the website. And when they looked at the results of the study, regardless of people's education level, regardless of their literacy level, everyone preferred the plain language version. They were able to complete the tasks faster. They were able to complete the tasks more accurately. And they were more satisfied with their experience. And so if you're trying to like justify plain language strategies to other folks, I think this is a really helpful study to point to because it like this is what we want for our whoever our participants, our clients, whoever we're working with, right? We want them to be able to do things quickly, to do things accurately, and to have a good experience while doing it. Um, yeah, I also see the reference to the Plain Writing Act of 2010 that if basically requires if you receive any federal funding, which I think pretty much everyone on this call does, you are required to use plain language to communicate in the pub to the public. Um, like with a lot of federal rules and guidelines, it's a little can be a little ambiguous and unclear of what exactly that looks like, but it's something that we should all be striving for. Um, we also know that when we use language that doesn't resonate with our audience, it's alienating. So when we use vocabulary that's unfamiliar, like jargon or technical language, people feel like our content isn't for them. They're like, I I am not the audience for this. They're also more likely to not trust us as an organization or trust the information that we're sharing. So when people read something like that can feel really technical and they don't understand it, they're less likely to believe that it's true. And then there's this motivational piece of like, if you're not meeting me where I'm at, why would I work to meet you where you're at, right? People, they don't feel like that you're when our audience doesn't understand what we're sharing, they feel like we're not trying to connect with them. So why would they want to connect with us? So that's the emotional piece coming back into it. There's also this ethical element of plain language. And so I'll unpack this quote, but it says plain language gives citizens and consumers better access to their rights. So, right, when we explain things clearly, easy to understand, people are more able to access and understand what their rights are, what they have available to them, what services they can access. And the second part says, and it combats the information apartheid that convoluted, overly complex documents generate. I think, ironically, this isn't very plain language. So, what he's saying is that when we have really complex information, there's people who are going to understand that just fine for a variety of reasons. And then there's people who are going to struggle to understand that. And so then the people who understand it just fine now have access to information that this other group of people don't have access to, right? And so that is continuing to advance inequity. Oh yeah, I am going to close this window so it stops doing that. So some reasons for using plain language, just to recap the things I shared. There's this practical piece. Why would we share information if it doesn't work for our audience? That's a waste of everyone's time. There's an ethical piece. Why would we want to communicate in a way that makes people feel bad, right? If it alienates our audience, that's just like, that ethically doesn't feel good. And then there's this equity piece, right? How oftentimes the people who need services the most have the hardest time accessing them. And that, again, furthers that inequity. So how do we do this? How do we create clear and effective communications? And now the rest of our time is going to be really thinking about strategies and how we can do this in our work. And so we're going to talk about plain language strategies. We're going to talk about the curse of knowledge, and then the trauma-informed lens we'll be talking about in part 2 next week. So what does it look like to center our audience? Before I share some of my thoughts, I'm curious to know from you all. I have some idea of who you write to and why, but you can unmute yourself if it's easier or share in the chat. Who's your audience and what kind of information do they come to you for? People who have lost or are losing their jobs, so people who are experiencing a pretty big stressful life change, right? If they're recently lost their job or are afraid of losing their jobs, going to lose their jobs. That's um, imagine people are carrying a lot of stress and anxiety in those moments.
For I don't know if everyone here is from the same agency or not, but for the Department of Employment Security, like how am I going to get paid? I think that's the main thing.
Oh,
How,
yeah.
when, and when would I get paid?
Yeah, so thinking about the colloquially unemployment, right? Like how am I going to get my money? People are just concerned with those like really basic process things. I saw someone else unmute if you wanted to share. Nope. Okay. Some things I see in the chat. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Leffler, and I work with GED and ESL students at John Wood Community College in Quincy. And I communicate with GED students at every level of academics, and I work with ESL students, and that communication can be a challenge. In writing, you just use simple language. In verbal communication, you sometimes have to be even more simple. And in fact, sometimes it helps to use their way of speaking, which may be improper English, because they just don't always put it together if we say it correctly. But then I also communicate with community partners, social service agencies, and government agencies, high schools.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Elizabeth. Yeah, and I think that I appreciate something we're going to talk about in a little bit is the idea of thinking about and paying attention to how your audience is already talking about the things that you want to talk about and mirroring their language, right? And the idea of like if they're using a phrase to describe a service that isn't the phrase that you're using, why not use the phrase that they're already using, right? So like um a yeah, the example that like comes to mind for me is like the idea of like a job counselor, which is a really foreign idea to a lot of folks, both people from the United States and from other countries, right? The idea that there's a person who will help you coach you kind of through the job process. And so what you might do is ask your audience, hey, if I were to describe a person who helps you find jobs, maybe supports you in the job search process, maybe reviews your resume, what would you call that person, right? And they might say job counselor, they might say job coach, they might say something else. And that can give you an idea of the language your community is already using that then you can take on. And then they don't have to learn a new term. You're using the language that's already familiar to them. Some things I want to call out in the chat just to go through. I'm seeing like a lot of the idea of like folks who are unemployed and like that kind of the stress that comes with having to find a job and there's a lot to unpack, right, when people are experiencing unemployment. And I think some of the things we'll talk about next week, I think, are definitely related to that stress and navigating those processes. I think businesses seeking information. Um, yeah, I see a comment about kind of overloading people with information, and I think it can be really hard um, to find that right balance of like people need to know a lot in order to navigate some of these really complex systems or to go through these processes. But how do we break it up so that they don't feel overwhelmed or spread it out across touch points? So thinking about I may know that I'm going to interact with someone 3 times. So how can I break up information so that I'm not overwhelming them the first time I meet with them? Um, People looking for like referrals to other partners or other services, youth trying to figure out their next plan, right? Supporting people with resumes and job applications. Awesome. Cool. So we're gonna watch a quick little video. This is a clip. Oh, don't start yet. Stop it. Thank you. This is a scene from the TV show Community. It's very quick, and it is there's two gentlemen, Troy and Abed, who have decided to go out for a fancy dinner. Um, and it doesn't quite go as they maybe anticipated. So I am going to switch my video. So as you watch this video, again, it's very short, it's about 30 seconds. Just think about, what does this have to do with communication? Where is there a communication breakdown in this example? And have you ever experienced something similar?
Peace. Abed, please. Allow me.
Okay, thanks. Let me see. That's not good.
They said market price. What market are you shopping at?
I'm going to run.
Me too.
Okay.
3,
1,
2,
3.
So if, let me switch back to the slides. So what does that, what was the communication mishap in this scene?
Not understanding market price.
Right, not understanding market price. It seems like a pretty obvious to someone who's unfamiliar with what that means in like the restaurant world, right? You see market price. I know what a market is. I know what price means. It must be, I go down to the Jewels and that's how much that lobster costs at the Jewels, right? But that's obviously not for folks, right? That's not what it means within the restaurant world. It has a slightly different connotation. So it created this misunderstanding about the language. So this is an example of an idea called the curse of knowledge. A silly kind of fun example, but the idea of the restaurant is assuming that people know what market price means. They're assuming that if you come to this restaurant, you understand what this concept means, you understand how to like figure out what that price might be. And so the curse of knowledge is what happens when we know something really well. It's really hard for us to remember what it's like to not know that's information. And so, right, so once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it was like to not know it. Our knowledge has cursed us, and it becomes difficult for us to share our knowledge with others because we can't really recreate our listeners' state of mind. So we forget kind of what it was like to not know this information, and then we talk over maybe our audience because they don't have the same background, the same context, the same understanding as us. And this is true, like I think sometimes we may not feel like we may not identify ourselves as experts, but we are experts in the work that we are doing every day. We think about it 40 hours a week, right? Like we know a lot about the work that we're doing, and our audience just doesn't. They're not doing this 40 hours a week or however much time you spend on your job, right? So the curse of knowledge can show up when we leave out key information. And this could be things like I've gotten invitation, like evites to events that didn't have the date on them, right? Because someone is like, I know it's May 28th. I don't need to think about it anymore. And it just kind of escapes them to remember to tell that to the audience. Um, it can also be things like not explaining new ideas and phrases. It can also show up when we communicate with our audience, like we communicate with our colleagues or our partners, other people who have the same background knowledge as us. And I think where this shows up a lot, or what this can look like a lot in a surprisingly harmful way, is oversharing information. When we do overload our audience with information because we're like, this all feels really important to me as someone who understands all the nuance of this work. And so then we think like, my audience must need to know this, and then we give them too much. And so there's a fine balance we want to be striving for. So think about it. Is there a time you assumed people had prior knowledge about a topic and then realized they didn't? Or maybe there's common questions that you get about an aspect of your work that feels really obvious to you. You're like, I don't know why people ask this question all the time. This feels really clear to me. You just take a minute to reflect. If you want to share, you can. You can unmute or um, you can unmute or share in the chat. Trevor, do you want to elaborate on your comment a little bit?
Yeah, we've in Southern Illinois in particular, there's a lot of folks that won't utilize the insurance program during layoffs because they think it's welfare, and it is not welfare. So we have to explain or break that stigma rather.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so people kind of coming in with um, this notion, and I think part of what you're getting at is people having ascribed certain values to things, right? Things being good or bad or kind of worthwhile or not worthwhile, and you kind of have to combat those notions that people have that they might be bringing into these services. Any other
Well,
examples?
the
Oh,
flip, the
go ahead.
flip side, the flip side of that is claimants who believe that they pay into unemployment, and therefore they're automatically supposed to receive it with no stipulations or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So right, the idea that like this is
It's
oh,
my money. It's
it's my
insurance. I
yeah.
paid into this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what unemployment insurance, how it works, what it looks like. It's also a confusing process to navigate for folks. Um, so there's a lot going on there.
I mean, just even trying to explain weekly benefit amount, like it doesn't make any common sense to them. So why aren't I receiving what I've been getting paid? And why are you only looking at these wages? So there's that part as well.
Yeah. Yeah, my partner was laid off about a little over a year ago, and he was unemployed for about 5 months, and so I learned a lot about that process from kind of talking to him about his experience. It was interesting. Yeah. Any other examples coming up for people?
It has to be a lot of examples.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay if folks don't want to share. I think, sorry, I have no idea why my screen is doing this thing where it is flipping back and forth. Let me just,
I'll throw another one out there. A lot of people just don't know our services exist as a workforce development system. Uh, so you kind of have to extra explain the resources that are there to a system, both employers, employees, rather than going in assuming they have an understanding of what reemployment and training benefits look like through WIOA.
yeah, yeah. So people just kind of don't. I think that's also an example of the curse of knowledge is that people don't know the scope of like what different services and programs look like. They may think of one aspect of it and not know that there's all this other stuff that they can access. So ways we can kind of get around the curse of knowledge. One is when we are creating a communication, whether it's an email, content for our website, we're getting ready to call someone on the phone, whatever it is when we are communicating with people, is to really think about what is our purpose. When the types of communication we are talking about together right now are not communication just for funsies. We're not just like sharing fun facts with people, right? We have a specific purpose we want people to accomplish. So we really want to think about really being grounded in our purpose. The other strategy is to collaborate and get feedback and to actually pay attention to how our audience is talking about things, what things are important to them, what questions they ask, paying attention to the challenges that we notice. Like if we get a lot of questions about something, that's a clue that we need to change how we're communicating about that thing, right? We can do better if we are getting a lot of questions, there's a gap in how we're sharing this information. So paying attention to things like that. And then I think there's digital tools. This is where I think readability formulas, so things like if you've heard of like Readable or the Hemingway app, or even just like the Microsoft Editor, where it gives you like suggestions to changes in your text. This is where these things can be helpful because the technology might identify aspects, it might flag things that could be confusing or challenging to our audience that we maybe didn't identify. And I think this is also where AI can fit in, where we can give it a text and say, what questions might someone have about this? Or if I know nothing about how unemployment insurance works, right? I'm a middle-aged person living in Illinois. I know nothing about unemployment insurance. If I were to read this text, what questions might I have? Or what words might be confusing to me? And so that's where I think AI can fit in and help us identify and flag some of the things that we might miss because of our cursed knowledge, right? I would not recommend putting a text in AI and saying, make it plain language. It is not very good at that. But it can be helpful at kind of identifying challenges within our content. And so one way we can counter the curse of knowledge is really thinking about what matters to our audience, what's important to them. So this is a flyer, an adaptation of a real flyer for youth summer job program. How does or doesn't this flyer meet the needs of youth looking for a job? What questions might they have? Now it's doing it the other way. I don't know why it's doing that. Not ineligible, right? This idea of like uh the kind of like a double negative there. Yeah, so what do you notice about this flyer? Or what questions might youth have about it? Right, there's no job description. It's not actually telling me like what kind of jobs I would be getting. So why I don't what kind of work am I going to be doing? I don't if I'm going to be scrubbing toilets, I'm not interested in that, but maybe there's something else that might be fun or be interest related to my career goals. What other questions do folks have?
What does that mean? Applications accepted until Family Services Department, Sunnydale Mall. How does that relate to that?
Right. It that there's this like I don't know, right? It's unclear, it's confusing. It doesn't talk about how much the pay is, right? That's a critical piece of information when people are looking for jobs.
The
There's no
hour.
time, there's no information about, and I'm not sure, I think there's two aspects of time here, right? It's like one are if there's an application deadline, and also like the time of the jobs, how long they are, work hours, things like that. Um, I am so sorry about this thing my screen is doing. It's never done this before, and I don't know why it keeps
It
doing that.
says summer jobs. It says summer jobs. On the bottom it says call Buffy Summers. So is it Buffy Summers jobs or is it summer jobs?
Oh, that is so funny. That was just me having fun with putting a fake person in there, but that is a good question. That is a hilarious and understandable point of confusion. Um, so I'm gonna stop sharing for a hot second and see if I can make my screen stop doing this craziness that it is doing. I'm really sorry about this, y'all. Again, this has not been an issue in the past. Uh, let's see now if this fixes it. Okay, so now we have a different version of the same flyer. Thinking about all those questions that we had, how does this version feel different?
Much more informative.
Feels
More
more.
details.
Yeah, it's got more details. It's trying to anticipate and respond to those questions that our audience is going to have, right? So it's talking about what are the job opportunities? How much am I going to pay? What types of jobs are there, right? So these are the questions that people are going to have. Um, and then it explains the queue or explains the how to apply process a little bit more clearly. It includes a shortened link. The original version had a really long URL that is going to be really hard for people to type into their device. Um, right, there's more ways to get information so people can choose how they're interacting with this content. There's a few choices. Um, does this answer every single question that we've had? No, because it's a flyer. We can't put necessarily every piece of information that our audience might want on it. I'm sure there's some other things that we might choose to prioritize differently. You may say, I actually think it's really important to say what months these jobs cover, right? And the start dates and the end dates. And that's something you could include, or maybe you choose not to. Maybe that's where people when they go to the application site, they get more information, right? But we have to think about what do we want to prioritize for our audience? And then the next step, when they look at the application, we can think about, okay, what additional information can we add there for our audience? Um, so those are a few examples. So when we're thinking about our purpose, we want our audience to do something. Maybe we want them to register or submit a form or an application. Maybe we're trying to change a behavior, right? We're trying to get them to do something differently. Um, maybe there's a decision or a choice they have to make, and we want to give them the information that the best information to make that choice. Whatever our purpose is, we want to come back to this question. What does our audience need to know in order to do this thing? Whatever I want my audience to do, what is the critical information they need to know in order to complete those steps? So let's think about this, having articulating a clear purpose. Um, there's this, would say this is a title of a workshop and it says resume writing. So I know this is going to be about writing a resume, I guess. Um, but how can we make this clearer for our audience? And if we're thinking about for this specific example, maybe our audience is people with non-traditional education or background. So maybe people who don't have degrees, or maybe people who have large gaps in their work history, maybe folks who have been incarcerated or earned degrees while incarcerated, right? So thinking about this is for folks who maybe have a non-traditional background, and we want to help them create a resume that frames their background more positively. If I just see this resume writing workshop, that may not speak to me, right? So how can we have a kind of articulate our purpose and our audience more clearly through the title of this workshop?
So what is this? This is just like a billboard that we're.
It's like a train, the name of like a workshop. If someone's facilitating a
I know.
workshop on resume writing.
So I mean, where would this be located? Where the person would see it?
Oh, like in the flyer promoting the workshop on wherever you would like promote a workshop. Yeah.
Oh,
Or on the website or on your, if you have like a community calendar, wherever people might learn about a workshop.
I mean, would it be easier to add what you have up top where it says resume writing, uh, creative resume writing for non-traditional education and backgrounds?
That
Would
would
that be too much?
absolutely be an option. Yeah. Yeah, that would absolutely be an option to just say creative resume writing for people with non-traditional backgrounds in education. Like that's one. And so then the question is, do we think that does that does those terms, will they connect with our audience? And if we think yes, then we can move forward with that. Do we think that our audience might have questions? Like I see someone put in the chat, dislocated employees resume writing workshop. I'm going to be really honest. I have no idea what dislocated employee means. I have guesses. I can make like informed guesses about what it might mean, but I don't actually know what it means. And so
It doesn't sound positive.
it it kind of doesn't sound positive. And so this is an example of like a phrase that's used internally in the industry that may not resonate with our audience. So how could we talk about it a little bit differently? Um, I liked in the chat, resume creation that fits you regardless of your background. Um, right? So thinking about writing a resume that fits you, focusing on the right, focusing maybe find your next job at our workshop if that's what people are going to get out of it, right? Being transparent and honest about what people will get about it. Um, right? Maybe something about learn how to craft a resume for all job seekers. Enhancing your employment future, writing a resume writing for a better job. Right? So thinking about creating a standout resume to help you get your next job. So these are all right. These are all possible ideas. There are many correct answers when it comes to thinking about plain language. But what we want to be thinking about is how are we going to connect with our intended audience? And so if our intended audience is folks with that non-traditional background, how are we speaking to what they might care about? So maybe things like how to highlight work experience, like how to highlight your skills in a resume when you don't have a degree. Could be a title of a resume workshop, right? For folks who don't have a degree, how do you highlight your skills and experience in a resume? Um, Things like that, right? Speaking to what the audience is looking for. So again, these are all great possible answers. We're thinking about what's going to connect with our audience. How do we help them understand what they're going to get out of this experience? And how do they know it's for them specifically? Um, yeah, any other questions or ideas before we continue on?
I was just going to say, add that it's free as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's always important, having that big and clear. People want to know. Absolutely. So some reminders for thinking about centering our audience. We want to start with a clear purpose. We want to, as much as possible, work with our audience so we can understand what they need, what they're looking for, what resonates with them. Try to anticipate and proactively address questions and check for that curse of knowledge piece. And if your audience feels really broad, think about who it's not, right? So thinking about going back to that resume writing workshop, that workshop is not for people who have who already kind of have a grasp on resume writing or who have traditional backgrounds. So we want to think about if that's not who our audience is, how do we really speak to the people we're trying to connect with? The next piece of plain language is, can our audience find what they need? Can they find the information that they need? So we have two flyers here. You can unmute or share in the chat quickly. What's different about how these flyers are organized?
The one number one just has it's too jumbled together. Um,
More like a PSA too.
It feels more like a PSA. Yeah,
I
it's
like
not
how
really
two is broken down with information. Breaks down information, gives you the title, whatever you're looking for, and you know where to go to find what you want to find.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's broken down. It's got clear sections. Um, it uses this like highlighting to draw people's eye to specific categories of information. Right, exactly. So the information in this second version is grouped in a logical way. It's grouped in a way that my audience would expect. The date, time, and location and registration information is together. This kind of how to prepare piece is together. And then there's a space for questions. Um, it's got this like title and tagline at the top to capture people's attention and a picture. So those are the nice like attention grabbing elements, but it's clearly organized into clear sections. Yeah, and I see someone saying number one is there's no real spacing or and it's not easy to read. So one tip that you can take away from here is center, making things center aligned like this. If it's more than like a phrase, right? Like a title or a few words, it's really hard for people to read. So once see this how it gets into like a lot of lines, center alignment makes it really difficult for folks to read. So an easy fix for a lot of things is just to not make it center aligned. So we want to organize information, like I've said a couple times, in a logical way that makes sense to our reader. And what that is going to change depending on what we're communicating. So it could be what's most important to least important. It could be based on that who, what, where, when, why, right? Like thinking about things that way. Um, a listicle is when we have like a list of things, but the order doesn't really matter. So it might be like, uh, top or like 5 things to do to prepare for your job interview. It doesn't really matter what order I do those things. It's just like 5 things that can help you prepare for a job interview. So it's going to depend on the information you're sharing, but we want to again think about what's going to make sense to our audience. And we want to use descriptive titles and headings throughout our text. So titles and headings are super important. And when I'm talking about titles and headings, these these are headings in our text. It might not immediately feel that way because it's not a like long form document, but these would be examples of headings. Um, and titles and headings are super important because they help guide our reader. They give our reader some like anchor points to help navigate through the text. They give them a path to follow. And oftentimes we approach a text with questions. We have things we want to know. And so having headings helps our reader find the information that they're already looking for more easily. And then it creates those visual sections, which again makes things feel more digestible. You don't have to read this too clearly, but share an emoji, a reaction, or a word in the chat. What's your reaction to this excerpt? How does it make you feel? The overload. I'm working dizzy eyes. Yeah, it's it's a lot. It is a run-on sentence. It sounds like AI. Um, so this is a 60-word sentence. This sentence has 60 words in it. Word salad, right? It feels kind of jumbled. It's hard to process. Uh, I just started skimming almost right away rather than trying to comprehend it all. And what I will say, and in response to that idea of skimming it, is that's how most people read is we skim stuff and we don't read it closely. And that's not a bad thing. That is how our brains have evolved to process a lot of information by skimming and scanning for key ideas. That is naturally how folks read. And so we want to write and communicate in a way that aligns with how folks naturally read by skimming and scanning. And that's where headings and breaking up text into digestible pieces is really helpful. Yeah, yada, yada, yada. Absolutely. The skimming, and I think that the skill of skimming and scanning is a specific skill that, and you'll see um, less confident or less folks with developing reading skills are more likely to read every single word on a page, which is again another reason why we want to have things be short and digestible because if you feel like you have to read every single word, this is really overwhelming. So some guidance on sentence length. Basically what we want to get to is have 1 point per sentence, right? A sentence is to communicate an idea, a single idea, 1 point. And we want to aim for an average of 15 to 20 words per sentence throughout a text. This is an average, this is a guideline. It's not going to be like if every single word is 15 sentences, or if every single sentence is 15 words, that's going to be really confusing and really jarring to read. It's not going to sound natural, but we want to aim for an average, right? And if we notice we have a lot of words that are more than 15 to 20 words, or a lot of sentences that are more than 15 to 20 words, that's a flag. We can go back and say, how can I tweak some of these? So let's make this easier to read. One option is just to split it up. A lot of times when we have long sentences, we can go through and break it up into just shorter sentences, right? So it says, we offer many services to employers. We can help develop job order requirements as well as match job seekers to job openings that match their skills and the job's requirements. We can also assist employers with special recruitment needs, job fairs, hard to fill job orders, job restructuring, closures, and downsizing. These sentences are still a lot. There's still quite a bit to digest, but it definitely is easier to read than the original, right? And this is with minimal changes to the text, right? We just broke it up into 3 sentences and kind of tweaked it so they'd be complete sentences. But so splitting it up is a pretty straightforward, easy way to make things more digestible. We can also use lists. So here it's broken up into lists. We offer many services to employers, and then there it's broken up into 3 points about what they can help with. And each point starts with a verb, which is part of this idea of our lists should feel grammatically consistent. So we want to use, when we use a list, each point should feel grammatically the same. We also could use that Q&A idea to break things up a little bit more. So how can we help employers? We do these things. How do we help job seekers? We can do these things, right? So I can look for those key questions to find the information that's important to me. And then if we're feeling fancy, we got time, we want to make it look real nice, we can think about how we can add visuals and bolded text to make it even more visually interesting and engaging. So when it comes down to kind of thinking about making texts organized and digestible, we want to aim for 1 idea per paragraph. A paragraph can absolutely be 1 sentence. If it only takes 1 sentence to get your idea across, great, you're done. You can move on. And then 1 topic per section. So when we're trying to decide kind of how to group texts, we want to think about, is this like aiming for 1 topic within that heading, within that section. And so coming back to this, reminders for helping readers find what they need, organize information in a logical way, limit information to 1 idea per paragraph and 1 topic per section, and use descriptive headings and subheadings to create easy to navigate sections. The next piece is, can our audience understand the information that we're sharing? So take a minute to look at this text. I'll give you a little bit more time because you might need to look a little more closely. And you can unmute or share in the chat what words or ideas might be new or challenging to readers. Yeah, even the idea of like talking about work experience. And experience might be a challenging word for folks. Vocational assessment. Yeah. That's one where like I know what those words mean, but I'm not really sure what that actually means in context. Work experience, orientation, right? Orientation is a word that like can mean a lot of different things. Um, Supportive services, right? Job club. There's some contradicting information. So some words that I pulled out, and there's right, again, different people are going to highlight different things, but thinking about there's some academic vocabulary like retain, um, post in this context, post employment, as in like after employment, post using post is a way to talk about after something is not the most common use of the word post or the yeah. Orientation, expenses, specialized, and then some jargon. So things like vocational assessment and skills, basic education, job club. The difference between kind of thinking about academic language and jargon, this isn't like this distinction isn't the most important thing to take out of this, but I think it can be helpful for people to start identifying words a little bit, what words might be challenging. Academic language is things that are words that are just more common in reading than in spoken language, and there's often a more common everyday alternative. So, for example, instead of post-employment, we could just say like after you leave your job, right? That's a more common everyday way to say the same thing. Um, and then jargon are those specialized terms that can be really helpful for people who work within a sector or kind of understand what a sector looks like. But that can also be part of what's isolating for folks. So we want to ask ourselves, do my readers need to know these specific words? Is this a word or a phrase that they are going to come into contact with again and again? So things like the name of a program. They probably need to know the name of the program in order to access it. So even if that name has jargon in it, we might need to use it and then explain it clearly. But sometimes the idea is enough. Sometimes it's enough to just get an idea across, and it doesn't really matter if we're using that specific academic language or jargon. So how is this version clearer? This is the same information, restructured, reorganized. You can unmute or share in the chat.
It's more descriptive, for one. Like it explains what is the job club. It explains that.
Yeah. So it's again, so this is job club being an example of a jargon that my audience needs to know. Like if they want to access this service, they need to know what it's called. They need to know that it's job club. We can't replace it with something else. So instead, we can give an explanation of what it means so people understand what we're talking about. I see it's more interesting, right? The images make it more engaging, more fun to look at. Um,
The pictures seem to kind of make you want to see what this picture is about. So the picture might explain it, but you want to see exactly what's this picture mean, and so you read that one sentence
yeah,
versus just all the letters there.
yeah, there's like this clear relationship between the images and the words. And so I'm like, ooh, that looks interesting. What's it about? Right? Let me get more information. And they together they help create an understanding. So some of the things we did to support understanding, it helps guide you towards more of your needs. Yeah, so this is reframed. The original was about what we do. This version is how we can help you, right? It's speaking to me and my needs. And so it's all framed in thinking about what's going to help me get what I need. The pictures help with understanding and also make it more visually interesting and fun. And then we removed, replaced, or explained some of the challenging language. So things like we already talked about, there's an explanation of what a job club is. Job readiness program was replaced with job training or classes because that's more familiar to a lot of people. Um, or people can maybe more easily like guess what that means. Right? A job class. Okay, it's probably going to teach me job skills. There might be other ways that you feel are clearer. That's okay. Replaced specialized support services with support in other parts of your life, right? Again, replacing it with common everyday language. Retain, right? That was one of those academic words. And really all it means is we help you keep your job, right? Again, so replacing things with a simple everyday language. Ah. So we can think about providing support with alternatives, adding a plain language definition, providing supporting context. So this could be like the why behind something, or giving an example. So some things you can think about when you're trying to help folks understand content. And how do we can use images to support meaning. Just some quick notes about choosing images. Pictures are really great for helping people like photographs are really great for helping people like connect emotionally, like we respond a little more emotionally to real people. And they're really useful when we have like a specific behavior we want people to do to use a picture of someone doing that behavior. Pictures are not great for things that are more abstract, more vague, or anything taboo. People like that can make people feel uncomfortable. If we have like photographs of something that's feel stigmatized or taboo or like an uncomfortable topic. Instead, we might want to use icons or illustrations like these little images. Um, and these can be really great for those more abstract ideas to give folks like a visual anchor, something to look back at, or to like help people remember what we talked about. And then if we're talking about processes, screenshots or videos, right, thinking a little bit more creatively and not just relying on words can be really helpful in demonstrating those things. How do we know people understand what we're sharing, right? We're trying really hard. One way is to check for understanding. So things like just normalizing questions so that people feel comfortable asking questions. So we can model asking questions like, oh, I wonder what would make sense as a next step. What do you think we should do next? Using open-ended questions. So what are some ways we could do this together? Or how can I support you? And then there's a strategy called teach back, where you can say something like, I want to make sure that I was clear. Can you tell me what you're going to bring to our next appointment? Right? And we're making it clear. We're not testing people. The goal of these questions is to make sure that we were clear in how we communicated. So we're asking them to kind of tell us what they heard. So some reminders for helping your reader understand what they find: use images to support meaning, write in simple active sentences, use everyday language in a friendly tone, define technical terms and jargon when you have to use them, and check for understanding. And our last piece of this plain language idea is, can our audience actually use the information that we're sharing? Is it usable? So this was an email. What are the next steps in this email, and what might make it difficult to complete these steps? There's no way to scan the QR code if it's an email. So we'll talk about that in a second. There's only one option to register. And it's not really clear that they want you to register. Yeah. So some challenges that came up in thinking about, right, actionability, aligning our processes and actions. If I'm opening this on my phone, I can't scan the QR code, or maybe I only have a phone. It's my only way to access my email, and now I can't register because I can't scan the QR code. So because there's no other link. It's also was shared. This was, and you don't know this from looking, so I'm telling you, this whole text was shared as an image, which is not screen reader accessible. So if someone is using a screen reader, which is an assistive technology for folks with certain disabilities, they would not be able to access the information here at all. And it's also just unclear, like, is this for me? It's not right. Like, there's a lot of like, I'm not even sure if I should register. What am I registering for? There's some context missing. So some tips about sharing links. If we're sharing them digitally, like in an email like that, the link we always want to use. The best practice is to use an embedded link. Um, so and there's sometimes depending on your audience, for some folks with less confident digital literacy skills, you might like embedded links might not be best. So there's right again, know our audience. But when we're using these embedded links, what I'm talking about is something like this, where there's text, and then I click on that text and it takes me to the link. Best practice, standard convention is it's underlined, it's a different color from the rest of our text, and it describes where it's taking me. So here I know it's going to take me to that registration form. It is not best practice to say just like click here, because people don't know where it's going to take them. It's not useful information for the audience. When we're printing resources, we want to have a shortened link if possible. Hope if you can work with like your IT people to do like the vanity or like the special links, that can be great with a descriptive link name. Um, uh, yeah, so we're not really, I see a comment about people who are colorblind. We're not talking about accessibility today, but running things through an accessibility checker is a really critical step in making sure that you have appropriate color contrast and things like that. And having it underlined, right? Like this example doesn't have great color contrast between the link and the text, but it is also underlined. So there's multiple clues telling someone that it is a link, even if the color, even if this was shared in black and white, and then, or if someone was colorblind and they couldn't see it. So that's a great point to bring up, Trevor. And not everyone can use QR codes for a variety of reasons. And we've learned that people don't really trust QR codes if they don't know where they're going. So people will not scan a QR code if it doesn't tell them where it's going to where it's going to take them. So we always want to include like where is this QR code going to take people, and having that alternative that they can just type in the link manually if they'd rather do that. So when we think about making content actionable, we can go back to this example we talked about at the beginning, right? Using active verbs, things like submit your application, visit this website, having a clear timeline for folks, so knowing exactly when that application closes. There's multiple ways we already talked about, right? That piece of like, there's multiple ways to access the application. That makes it more actionable. And there's multiple ways to get support. I can call or I can text. So that again increases the usability for our audience. So some reminders, start with a clear main idea and purpose. Test your processes, make sure your links work, go through the form yourself and make sure everything goes smoothly. I recommend sometimes doing things wrong on purpose. So if you have an online form, try filling it out incorrectly and seeing what happens, because then when people do it, when people make mistakes, you can support them because you know what happens when you make mistakes. Use active verbs for instructions and make it clear how to get help. Always have an option for more support because people are always going to have questions. So just put it there up front. If you have questions, here's how you can get in touch. So we're wrapping up. We're getting on to our final things. I'd love to hear from folks. You can unmute or share in the chat. If there's a question you still have, or maybe there's something you want to learn more about, or if there's something you learned today that you're curious or excited to try moving forward. And give folks a second to think about what resonated with them, or any questions that folks still have. I picked up my mug, and I am not kidding you, my coffee splashed in my eye. Thank God it's not super hot anymore. I don't even know how that happened with my glasses.
I got a question.
Yeah.
So the information as it was presented or has been presented today, is this more specific to when you're sending out communications for like for well, it's all informational, right? But like I'm wondering, like for our agency where we have to send out a notice when the claimant files for benefits, and we're letting them know when they need to certify, how much they're going to get paid, yada yada.
Yeah.
It would, I'm sure this would apply in some ways, but I was just wondering, as far as the visuals, would it be inappropriate to provide visuals on a document such as that?
Absolutely not. And so when we're thinking about visuals, right? Like for something like that official is official government letter, you might not want it to look like, right? Maybe you're like, this is not appropriate for that context,
Right.
that maybe that's not what we're going for. But what you might use is some icons to help people, right, connect with different pieces of information, create those visual anchors, thinking about um if there's like, right, you could have like, if there's a form they need to fill out, you could have a little icon representing that form, right? Or if there's a deadline, maybe have a little icon of a calendar so people know that that's an important date, right? Thinking about adding visual elements that way. Um, and then you could also think about if it makes sense, whether in that document or if there's like a supplementary resource of having those screenshots. Because I know that sometimes from other folks I've talked at through IDES, that sometimes people struggle with those portals and knowing how to navigate them. So thinking about, are there visuals that you can share with people of like, here's where you click to submit this thing, or here's where you can find that form, right? So maybe thinking about visuals that way. Um, so
Okay.
there's
Thank you.
definite, sorry?
I said thank you.
Yeah. And then there's other, what we didn't really talk about too, is this other aspect of visual elements like design features, like you can use like lines to create sections, like clear sections within a text, or putting critical information inside a different colored box so it pops out to people. So there's other visual things that you can include to make things more visually interesting than just text. I will add to the resources doc um, a project we worked on with the Cook County Assessor's Office. So like a very official government document that we added a lot of visual components to. So you can see an example of that. So I will add that link.
I have a question related also to the unemployment office. So our correspondence is mailed correspondence, right?
Mhm.
And if you have experience, you know what I'm talking about, how lengthy some documents are. So how much is too much?
That really depends. I think it comes back to what does the audience need in order to complete the process. What you want to be thinking about is, I think when you have a lot of information to share and you're like, we've cut it out as much as we can. We've taken out as much as we can. This is all critical information. That's where we're thinking about, is it broken up into clear sections, um, right? Where people can easily find specific pieces of information that are important to them. Um, is there white space on the page? So is there empty space where there's nothing so that people aren't overwhelmed by information? And that might mean, you know what, maybe this document needs to be 3 pages instead of two. And we have to account for that, but that's what's going to make it a little bit more digestible for people, is having that space. Um, and then again, thinking about like thinking about the whole process, not documents individually, but thinking about, okay, someone gets this thing in the mail that's probably going to tell them to go to a website. And then that website will direct them to this form. So what information needs to go in this mailer? What can go in the website? And what can just be in the form? And that might create some space to take things out and think about where they go in that process. So thinking about the whole process, not just the individual letter, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. But like follow-up question. So were there any study done how much people read? I mean, when I receive an official document, I really never read the whole document. I'm expecting everything to be in the first half of the page, max the first page. The back of the document, when it's a fine print, maybe the most important part that is in the fine print, I'm very rarely reading it. And plus the official document. When you read the first page, is plenty for you. It's more than enough. And I do like it. Use sectional suggestion of sectional, and with the title or subject class. So maybe then I can skip read only what I would like to read, and skip whatever I'm not interested. But
Yeah.
but what they're studied at, how much people read the document. Do they read 6 pages, 2 pages, one? I mean, even if it's important document.
That I think is from so there's studies about like how much time people will spend reading things, so it's less about like the page length and more just like how much, right? Like usually it's 30 seconds or less before people decide if something's worth their time, right? So they're oftentimes it's within a few seconds. They're looking at something and being like, this is important for me to read, or it's not important for me to read. Um, so one of the things that I think that really stood out to me, Lorena, that I think is really important is this idea of fine print which is a kind of standard convention that's been around for a long time that we encourage folks to move away from because people don't read fine print. They don't read footnotes. They don't read, go to this page for additional information. They don't read it. So it's thinking about how do we, if it is important enough for people to read, it needs to be in the body of the text. It shouldn't be a special edition or an additional thing that they need to go to. So in those cases, we're thinking about how do we, or like coming back to that organization piece. I think also to your point, Lorena, like this idea of people are not necessarily like people are going to read the top part of the document and decide what's relevant to them. And then if they're like, I feel like I got everything I need, I'm not going to read the rest of it. So that's where we can think about how do we use understanding that behavior, because you are not alone in reading documents that way. Understanding that behavior, what information do we need to give people in that top third of the page to make sure that they know that there's other information? So that could be things like maybe that top third of the page is an introduction and it explains, hey, this letter is 3 pages long. The first part talks about X, Y, and Z. The second part talks about X, Y, and Z. The third part talks about X, Y, and Z, right? And then you're giving people like a table of contents so that they know that there is important information throughout the document, that it isn't just like legal BS that they're not going to read, like, right? That it's actually critical and important for them to pay attention to. And so
Thank
these
you.
are great questions.
This is very helpful. Absolutely helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that it's helpful. I'm gonna share, we have a minute left, just two quick things. Part of this training is we have some limited like consulting sessions. There's information in the resources doc on like what that is and how to access it. So if you have questions about specific materials that you want help with, that's an option. You can sign up for one of those times. And they are first come, first serve. So like when they're gone, they're gone. Um, but we also have office hours. So if you're like in, I don't know, September, you're creating something and you're like, oh, I'd really like some feedback on this. We have monthly office hours. They're once a month on Tuesdays. You can pop in, ask whatever questions that you have about documents or materials or just general plain language questions. And we also have a community of practice. They are not normally the same week. June is a weird anomaly just because of scheduling. And our community of practice is a group space. We talk about ideas related to communication. And that's again another space where you can bring questions about your work and get feedback from other folks who also care about these topics. I'm going to put up the last slide that has my contact information. I know Kirsten has her as a survey she's going to send out. This is also our internal survey if you want to give some feedback. But Kirsten's is more important, so if you only do one, do hers. But yeah, feel free to email me with any follow-up questions. Thank you all for your attention and your engagement today. I really appreciate all the thoughtful questions and participation, and seriously, don't hesitate to reach out if you have follow-up questions. And I will add some more examples to the resources of the things that we talked about.
Awesome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Sarah, for your time today. Just a couple of closing housekeeping things. Thank you all for joining us. I put the link for Sarah's part 2 to this topic in the chat if you would like to register for that. It also goes out in our workforce professional development email listserv emails. You can be on the lookout for that if you don't catch that link. I also put our follow-up survey that Sarah was just talking about in the chat here. And you'll receive the same follow-up survey in the follow-up email tomorrow. I'll put the registration link for her part 2 webinar in the follow-up email tomorrow too. And I did put her PDF of slides in the chat for all of you, but it was also on her bit.ly link with all of her resources. And I'll have all of her resources. Thank you, Sarah. And the recording from today posted on our Illinois Workforce Academy website, which I just put in the chat. And those also post to Illinois WorkNet as well. If you have any other logistical questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you, Sarah, again for your time today. We really appreciate it. And everyone have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.